Hi, Dr. Reagan Robertson, CCO of Productive Dentist Academy here, and I have a question for you. Are you finding it hard to get your team aligned to your vision, but you know you deserve growth just like everybody else? That's why we've created the PDA Productivity Workshop. For nearly 20 years, PDA workshops have helped dentists just like you align their teams, get control of scheduling, and create productive practices that they love walking into every day. Just imagine how you will feel when you know your schedule is productive, your systems are humming, and your team is aligned to your vision. It's simple, but it's not necessarily easy. We can help. Visit productivedentist.com/workshop. That's productivedentist.com/workshop to secure your seats now.
And dentistry is kind of it's the star right now. It's what private equity wants.
Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Bruce B. Baird, and you're listening to the Productive Dentist Podcast. In this podcast, I will give you everything that I've learned over the last 40 years in dentistry, working with thousands of dentists. I'll tell you, it's not that my way is the only way. It's just one that has worked extremely well for me, and I'd love to share that with you, so you too can enjoy the choices and lifestyle that productivity allows. More time for things you love, increased pay, better team relationships, and lowered stress. Let's get into it with this week's episode of the Productive Dentist Podcast.
Hi, this is Dr. Bruce Baird with the Productive Dentist Podcast. Today, I wanted to talk. Last week before last, we talked about EBITDA, and I was telling you that I was out in Honolulu speaking to a bunch of dentists, and nobody knew what it was. And hopefully, you have a little bit better understanding of what EBITDA is. It basically is the profit in your practice. When you take away all the stuff like your car that you expense through, a lot of those things, and that is what we call your EBITDA. So if we're looking at another question that I get, I was just down in San Antonio on a panel discussion this past weekend at Freedom Founders. That's David Phelps' course for and it's not just real estate investing, but it's a really great course on alternative investing, including real estate. But they have lots of different experts that come in. But the question kept coming up about private equity and what is private equity. And I've done, when I've been doing my research and really learning about consolidation theory, which is the aggregation of dermatology practices, the aggregation of ophthalmology practices, of physicians, and for the last 15 years, dentistry. And dentistry is kind of it's the star right now. It's what private equity wants. And what private equity is actually a fund that is put together for investing. So let's say a company goes out and finds investors. And these are not people wanting to invest, $50,000 or $100,000. These are families and groups that are interested in investing hundreds of millions of dollars. And so they put this together, and they do it in a way that allows these people to have a fixed contract, meaning it is a closed-end contract. I'm going to invest X amount of dollars with you. I'm going to put in $20 million. They find a lot of people that want to invest that $20 million, and that becomes their fund. Now that fund has a lifespan. That lifespan is 5 to 7 years usually, and it has a guaranteed return. So what the group does that is forming this private equity, and there are huge private equity groups that have hundreds of billions of dollars as a part of it, and they get more investors because they've had a great track record of doing great things. The KKRs, the AKKRs, which I sold compassionate finance to 2 years ago, they have a huge track record of returns, of getting returns of 8%, 9%, 10%. And that's what they're looking for, is that 7 to 10 maybe even 12% return for the investors. Now, what they want is the opportunity to get a 3X or a 4X. So what I'm saying is if they invested $100 million over a 5-year period, what they'd like to do is get back a return of, they did 100 million, let's say 350 million or 400 million. This is what they do. So they're looking for cash producing businesses that have profit, that have EBITDA, and they go straight to doing this investing. But being a closed fund, what I want you to understand is, and it can be confusing, but let's say it's a 5-year closed fund or a 7-year closed fund. They pay that person, that investor, here is 10%. So if it's 100 million, here's 10 million. And they pay them that 10 million every year for 5 years. And at the end of that 5 years, if it's a 5-year closed-end contract, they get their money back. So here's your 100 million and here's your 50 million for a 10% return. But in order to do that, they have to liquidate whatever it is that they've purchased. That's what, therein comes the word, the closed-end fund. So they invest at 5 years. Well, what do they do at 5 years? How does it change? What do they have to do? Well, what they have to do is they have to find another private equity firm, usually a larger group. So there's all different sizes of private equity, and they'll find a larger group that will come in and buy them out. So they leave the investment, and now there's a new investment. I know with Heartland, they had a certain group of investors, and then that changed to the Canadian Teachers Association, and then that changed to KKR. In other words, the big boys start to get involved. And I know BlackRock, one of the largest private equity groups in the country, they have just gotten involved in dentistry, so they're starting to invest in dentistry, and they're the largest in the world. But one of the questions, and when we start talking about private equity and DSOs or forming a DSO, my question has always been, well, what happens? And we know consolidation is going to go on for, 7 more years, 8, 9, 10. Nobody knows for sure. But when the market gets to the 65, 70%, like we've talked in the past, that's when private equity is not as good an investment for the private equity groups. So what do they do at the end of this 7 or 8 year cycle if in fact, we're doing 5-year closed-end agreements? And that's something I've done a lot of research, asked lots of questions. And what will happen when you get to the point of full consolidation in the marketplace? What happens to the private equity groups? And I'm going to use the term that gets left holding the bag. Well, that's one way of thinking, but the truth is they're not really holding the bag. I mean, like they're not going to be able to do anything with it. What we're going to see, and this is my prediction, and take it for what it's worth, but my prediction is we're going to see a consolidation of the consolidators. And I think that's you're going to see, 5 to 7 major groups. I would assume that the Heartland will be there, Aspen. There's some that are so large, and they're going to start buying up other DSOs in the marketplace. And that will be the first step. And then, you're going to start seeing the possibility of them giving a return because they have cash coming in. They own these practices. They have cash coming in, and they would love to leverage that with, say, insurance companies, with other groups that are looking for return. It's going to go to more asset-based, just straight returns. They're not going to try to keep flipping and making this, because there won't be anybody to flip it to make that 5X, 4X return. But they still have a great product. They still have these dental offices that are still producing. So when I look at it, I go, okay, I understand that. The other thing that they might do, or they will do, is that's when you'll see 2 or 3 of these groups, these large groups, go public. And that's where you see them getting returns, 30x times, 30 times their EBITDA. And so that's the scenario. But what does that have to do with dentists? What does that have to do with a dentist selling to a DSO? And I've told you guys, we're doing a group, all of our PDA docs. We're bringing our PDA docs together and we're presenting that straight to private equity. We currently have, we're closed in on 40 offices that are interested with a total EBITDA of 25 million plus. And these offices have not, committed 100% yet. We're going through the process of building the platform. But they've shown an interest, and that we'll be signing an LOI here probably in the next 3 weeks that says, yes, I'm interested. Well, there is no obligation that they have to sell until we go out and find the right private equity group. And the right private equity group is going to be somebody who has already been in the game or who wants to get in the game of dentistry and find great returns. These practices that have been a part of the Productive Dentist Academy, they're unicorns. They have EBITDAs of 25% of their total collection. So these are top producing and top profitable type practices, and we're aggregating them, and we're also including coaching with it. So our coaching clients at PDA grow on average about 13% year over year. So we're going to bake in coaching with that. We're going to continue to grow that business and continuing to add PDA docs to this as they determine, yes, they want to do that. I told you last time, why on earth would you sell a practice when you're 41 years old? And now I understand that much better. The reason I understand it better is because you're taking cash off the table. And people say, well, why would I want to do that? Don't confuse cash and ownership. If you're able to do whatever it is you want to do, meaning no one's going to tell you how to do your dentistry, no one's going to force you to do more crowns or less crowns, no one's going to change your supplies, no one's going to change your lab. What they're going to do is they may negotiate with that lab and get better pricing. They may aggregate your accounting services. They may do these things to save money, but that money goes to the bottom line, which is good for private equity. It's also good for the doctor that owns portion of his practice. So having said that, that's the deal that we're doing. We're putting it together so that doctors have options. You're still going to be an independent practitioner. So what happens if you sell 60% of your business and you roll 40%, meaning a joint venture with this DSO? Well, you still own 40%. You get 40% of distributions of profit. Again, why would private equity want to mess with offices that are doing phenomenal? And I bring that up because you see people out there saying, oh yeah, just sign up and bring your office and pay us money for the evaluation. I talked about that last time. Pay us money. That's BS. Don't pay anybody money to do an evaluation, because there's plenty of people out there that will do it at no charge. Now, it has to be kind of an independent situation where you can get an evaluation of your EBITDA, but doing it from a third party standpoint, not from the DSO that's buying you. Why? Because they're going to control what your EBITDA is, and that's going to tell you a lot about what your overall value is. So what we're doing at PDA is we're using an independent group that evaluates all of our offices and gives everybody that EBITDA on the same playing field, on the same deal. And that to me is extremely important. So we're going to continue to talk here. And I know, I like doing these podcasts 12 to 15 minutes long so that you can hear it on the way to work or whatever. But what happens to the dentist? And I'm going to talk about this next on the next podcast we do about what does the dentist do and how do they make money through the process of working through a DSO, and what the DSO is. If they're leaving you alone and letting you do the things that you that you want to do, which truthfully is the PDA practices. They don't mess with us. Heartland never messed with me after I sold to Heartland 12 years ago. Why? Because we were productive. We were putting out tons of revenue. So those are the things that we look at. And we'll talk about that on the next podcast. So I don't know. I hope that the discussion of private equity was helpful. I get lots of questions about it on an ongoing basis. So I look forward to the next podcast and to talk a little bit more about what is the dentist see and how does that work for them. Talk to you guys next time, and appreciate your votes for top podcast, and tell your friends.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Productive Dentist Podcast. If you found this episode helpful, make sure you subscribe. Pass it along to a friend. Give us a like on iTunes and Spotify, or drop me an email at podcast@productivedentist.com. Don't forget to check out other podcasts from the Productive Dentist Academy at productivedentistpodcast.com. Join me again next week for another episode of the Productive Dentist Podcast.